We're going to get started with our third panel. It is capital operations, and I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we'll get started. So we have Andrew deWaard on the role of finance in the supply chain of the cultural industries. We have Wang from platform to re-platformization, how Alibaba converts and converges users to extend its outreach, power, and profits. We have Cindy Lin on defer and pass on, anticipating accuracy for carbon. And Kay Dickinson, the global studio, logistics, labor, and financialized landscapes. So we'll begin with Andrew deWaard.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to the organizers of this wonderful conference, and thank you all for cutting your lunch short to be back. So let's start with a fun, interactive game. Can everyone take out their wallet or purse and look for the freshest dollar bill they can find? Does anyone have a real crisp one from 2018 by chance? 2018. If you do, you'll see the name of Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. The other place you would find his name is in the end credits sequence of many Hollywood films. Through his film financing firms Dune Entertainment and Rat Pack Dune Entertainment, Mnuchin has invested in over 150 films, including huge blockbusters like Batman vs. Superman, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and even a few good films like Mad Max and Inherent Vice. Here he is striking a Bond villain pose with his newly minted banknotes. Hollywood's influence literally inscribed upon American currency. This potent symbol represents the interrelation of entertainment, finance, and the American government, a complexity that remains an understudied phenomenon in media studies. This paper argues for a heightened awareness of the financial processes and ideologies that facilitate the actions of media companies, executives, and practitioners. Furthermore, with regards to the cultural supply chain, media industry scholars and historians tend to focus on the three most immediate components: production, distribution, and exhibition or circulation. This model reflects, I would say, an outdated conception of monopoly capitalism. Instead, I argue, the perspective of financial capitalism is required. Cultural industries are less like the factory floor and more like a trading floor, less interested in commodification, more focused on speculation. For Robert Brenner, the financial collapse in 07-08 was just a symptom. The crisis started in the 70s and it persists to this day. Only the rate of profit is an accurate measure of the health of the economy, and it is not great. The post-war boom peaks in the 60s, and the rate of profit has steadily declined since then, minus a brief blip in the 2000s on account of massive deficit spending, tax cuts, and the housing bubble. Thus, average global GDP growth is also steadily falling, as is the rate of investment in equipment and labor, which is a solid measure of the health of manufacturing. Labor is increasingly employed by large corporations that hoard corporate profits rather than small businesses, which tend to redistribute profits and wages. Union representation continues to fall, which correlates pretty well with the rise in income share of the top 10%. Whose taxes continue to fall and have just fallen again, thanks to Paul Ryan. Manufacturing has plummeted, while the financial sector has risen dramatically, and inequality has returned to Gilded Age levels, not just in the US, but in many developed countries as well. Within this widening inequality benefiting the 1%, it's in fact a very limited 0.01% that is hoarding the world's wealth, primarily consisting of managers and participants in investment banks, hedge funds, and private equity firms. So my basic research question is, what is the effect of this very small, wealthy, extractive industry on the cultural industries, particularly film, television, and popular music? The financial world is purposefully opaque and difficult to research, but I want to suggest a number of entry points. On August 4, 2015, Disney CEO Bob Iger made a seemingly innocuous admission during its quarterly earnings report. There had been some subscriber losses at ESPN, Disney's flagship sports channel. Analysts downgraded Disney's stock, and as disappointing earnings reports came in for other entertainment companies, a massive sell-off took place in the media market. In just 2 days, nearly $50 billion of market value was lost between Disney, Time Warner, CBS, Fox, and Comcast. This episode is a dramatic demonstration of an oft unacknowledged fact. The cultural industries are acutely vulnerable to the whims of traders and analysts on Wall Street. To zoom in a bit closer, we can consider the impact of institutional investors, which are asset management companies that buy stocks in massive quantities. They've gone from owning about 7% of the US stock market in 1950 to almost 70% today. If the three largest institutional investment firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, were counted as a single investor, they would be the largest owner of 88% of the companies listed on the S&P 500. Because institutional investors often own stakes in rival companies within concentrated industries, these companies are incentivized to keep prices high and wages low. Far from passive investment vehicles, which is what allows them such low tax rates, institutional investors are actually actively engaging in their investments by nominating board members, sharing business strategies, and voting on compensation packages for executives which align their interests together. It's not a coincidence that salaries for the CEOs of media companies have surged over the last decade, along with those on Wall Street. Like me, you probably had a really shitty flight getting here. Well, in part, that is because not only has the airline industry consolidated so severely, but institutional investors own the largest stakes in all of them. Economists have shown that common ownership of airlines increased prices by as much as 10% and contributes to the continual increase in fees and extra charges. Common ownership of banks similarly led to increases in fees as well as reductions in interest rates. Is this happening in the media sector? My research says yes. Here are the top institutional shareholders where we definitely see common ownership. BlackRock is the biggest investment firm, but it's the second biggest Vanguard with about $3.5 trillion in assets. That is by far the biggest investor in the media sector. In essence, every TV show and movie should have a credit that says brought to you by Vanguard. When it comes to ownership, these 10 firms hold a sizable degree of power. Now, institutional investors can be seen as a sort of external financial factor, but we can look at internal financial factors as well. For example, each major media company has developed its own venture capital arm, multiple venture capital arms. So Comcast has Comcast Ventures, but NBC Universal has its own investment as well. Disney has Steamboat Ventures, Disney Accelerator, Shamrock Capital Advisors, etc. Financial gains are, of course, an element of this investment strategy, but strategic goals are also a key reason for corporate venture capital, or CVC, allowing less agile companies to engage in research and development by proxy. CVC allows big companies to gather information on new markets and technologies and enter those markets more easily, often through acquiring resources and intellectual property from its ventures, or even assessing potential acquisition targets via venture capital. We also have what I call billionaire boutiques, where the 1% and the privileged sons and daughters of the wealthy spend their daddy's money in pursuit of fame and glamour. Glitzy Hollywood parties are just the fortunate byproduct. It's, quote, changing the world that is the new motto for the scions of the plutocratic class. So you'll see a lot of these films are liberal, Oscar bait, social problem type films. I like that 99 Homes, a really great movie about the foreclosure crisis, is made by the son of a Russian oil tycoon. All my students at UCLA love Annapurna Pictures, but it troubles me to tell them that it is Megan Ellison, the daughter of Larry Ellison, who facilitates that. And finally, we have private equity firms, which I want to focus on today. Previously known as leveraged buyout firms, private equity firms are a specialized, high-risk type of investment fund subject to minimal regulatory oversight. Typically operating for 5 to 10-year periods, they raise enormous levels of debt against the assets of the target company, restructure the company to maximize efficiency, and I'll come back to this logistical maneuver, then sell the streamlined properties at high profit margins. With little to lose if the company's debt drives it into bankruptcy and much to gain if the investment can be exited from successfully, private equity is a textbook case of moral hazard, as someone else bears the costs of their risks. There are thousands of private equity firms, but the biggest are Blackstone, which has assets under management totaling $360 billion, then Carlyle, KKR, Bain, and TPG and Silver Lake, which those two have a huge interest in Hollywood. Technically, these firms aren't located on Wall Street, but just up the street from here on West 57th, many in the same building actually, 9 West on 57. Perhaps not a coincidence, the northern White House Trump Tower is just around the corner. Since the turn of the century, there's been a huge boom in private equity deals, in part due to expansionary monetary policy and favorable tax breaks, such as the carried interest loophole, which allows private equity firms to be taxed at the much lower capital gains rate, even though they are not passive investments. Every politician supports closing the carried loophole when they're out on the campaign trail, because it is so obviously corrupt, and this included Obama as well. However, once a politician is elected, they meet Wall Street's army of lobbyists. Private equity uses a variety of methods to extract profit from its target companies. So we have dividend recapitalization, which is taking on new debt in order to pay a special dividend to shareholders, which then pressures the portfolio company to reduce costs and lay off workers. This is basically the starve the beast strategy that Republicans enact towards the social safety net. Transfers from workers is another logistical maneuver, laying off high-wage labor, subjecting remaining workers to intensified work, reducing wages and benefits, and shifting from union to non-union. Transfers from taxpayers is another maneuver, increasing the company's debt load, which reduces tax liabilities because of the favorable tax treatment of debt compared to equity. There's leverage and debt arbitrage. This is restructuring a company's financial structure or offshoring its headquarters in order to reduce tax payments. There's buying back debt. Although private equity ownership is private, debt is often freely traded. So when a company struggles, which can sometimes be the intention, its debt can then just be bought back at a steep discount. There's debt exchange. This is when bondholders forgive part of their debt in exchange for a higher interest rate or a more senior position in the capital structure. There's bankruptcy for profit, taking a portfolio company into and out of bankruptcy in order to slash debt and pension obligations. Arguably, this is what's happening to iHeartMedia right now, which just went bankrupt a few weeks ago. And then there's breach of trust, which is not honoring agreements and contracts with workers, vendors, and lenders. This works because the negative reputational effects accrue to the company, the portfolio target, rather than the private equity firm itself. As you can see, not a lot of these strategies have anything to do with actually making a better product or serving customers, let alone with creative expression that we hope for, or that the cultural industries have as their purpose. Instead, they are purely financial engineering. In the context of a conference about logistics, we could certainly consider this optimization for the sake of lowering labor costs, but it isn't actually interested in creating a more optimized supply chain. It's simply extraction. It's a different kind of logistics for profit only. Now let's turn to see where these firms have enacted such extractive strategies. So first in the music industry, which has suffered enormously because of private equity investment. While some growth has been found lately in streaming subscription services, nearly all of these profits are flowing to one of 3 companies, which is a result of a wave of consolidation that happened because of bad private equity management. So in 2004, Warner Music was run into the ground by Bain & Co., then sold to a Russian billionaire. Terra Firma destroyed EMI, then sold it for parts, selling the publishing to Universal and the recording to Sony. Clear Channel, now called iHeartMedia, was so saddled by debt by Bain and THL that it finally declared bankruptcy. So file sharing is often considered the reason for the decline in music sales since the turn of the century, but I would argue that private equity is in fact the culprit. Within this consolidated, financialized world of recorded music, the percentage of artists who now have a dominant role is unsurprising. The top 1% account for 77% of all artists' recorded music income, and streaming subscription revenue is actually increasing that inequality. Moving to Hollywood, in 2004, MGM was the first big blockbuster buyout in the area of financialization. Seizing the opportunity to acquire a stressed asset, a group of private equity investors purchased MGM for nearly $5 billion. By 2010, it was drowning in interest payments on its massive debt, and the company filed for bankruptcy in order to clear that debt. It would reemerge the following week with a new set of private equity firms and hedge fund managers. but the original PE firms lost out on their investment, as would any pension funds or endowments that were involved, which is pretty common with private equity. Of course, layoffs were severe. In 2007, during the height of the pre-crash private equity boom, an even larger leveraged buyout occurred with the $13.7 billion takeover of Univision, the Spanish-language broadcasting giant. The winning consortium leveraged the deal with a debt level 12 times its annual cash flow. Since then, Univision has ceded almost half of its audience, and amidst declining advertising revenues, is seeking an IPO to raise money in order to pay off its $9 billion debt. There have been a series of other private equity deals in Hollywood, but I'm particularly interested in the talent agency takeover, which we can see near the bottom of this chart, because it brings a sort of different approach to the media supply chain. In 2010, TPG bought a minority stake in Creative Artist Agencies, one of the industry's two most powerful talent agencies. Then in 2014, bought majority control. Similarly, Silver Lake Partners acquired a minority stake in William Morris Endeavor, the industry's other dominant talent agency, in 2012, then followed that with a majority investment in 2014. With Silver Lake's massive capital funding, WME acquired Sports and Media Group, IMG Worldwide, which is the third biggest agency. The combined WME-IMG now has a market capitalization of $6.3 billion. In October, it was renamed Endeavor, a callback to Ari Emanuel's original company, Endeavor Talent Agency. If you ever watched that horrible show Entourage, the horrible character Ari is based on this Ari Emanuel. The first step in the private equity playbook is lowering overhead, and both CAA and Endeavor have been lowering costs by laying off several agents, cutting wages and bonuses, and reducing expenses. In contrast to this cost-cutting of labor, meanwhile, Silver Lake and TPG have been spending freely in order to expand the scope of Endeavor and CAA's businesses. Both Endeavor and CAA are aggressively moving into actual production despite the obvious conflict of interest. Known in industry jargon as double dipping, the involvement of talent agencies in production was expressly banned by the Screen Actors Guild for nearly 60 years, but its legality has been in limbo since that agreement expired in 2002. As of a few weeks ago, the Writers Guild is finally entering into this dispute, accusing the talent agencies of a conflict of interest, noting that, quote, agencies have little incentive to defend or improve writers' pay because their compensation is not tied to the well-being of their clients, end quote. Much of this production is difficult to trace, as both CAA and Endeavor have set up inscrutable financing and production arms, often through the proxy of their private equity owners. Endeavor owns a stake in the Rain Group, a merchant bank that invests in digital media and entertainment companies, including Vice Media. Through Rain, Endeavor invests in Media Rights Capital, the opaquely named firm described as a hybrid financier, rights holder, and development pod. It has been involved in a number of films that were packaged explicitly for Endeavor clients. Other investors in Media Rights Capital include Goldman Sachs and private equity firms such as Guggenheim Partners. As of late, the talent agencies have become more bold in flaunting these production rules, and the recently created IMG Original Content has more than 50 series and specials on its active roster. Endeavor Content, meanwhile, has financed, packaged, and sold more than 100 films and TV shows since 2016. Silver Lake has also made a couple of other interesting acquisitions, such as Cast and Crew Entertainment Services, a 40-year-old company that provides many back-end accounting services to Hollywood productions, such as payroll processing, residuals processing, production incentives, and production tax credit financing. The following year, Silver Lake acquired its main competitor, Cast and Crew's main competitor, Cap's Payroll. So owning the combined data of two of the biggest payroll companies in Hollywood is an obvious strategic advantage, as the same company negotiates wages and residuals for its clients while having access to much of the industry's historical and contemporary data on those same negotiations. Silver Lake has thus fashioned a new type of supply chain, or what I would call a financial shadow studio, with financialized integration: the talent, the data, the financing, the production, and the investment portfolio. In these financial shadow studios, the circulation of capital is difficult to untangle, but it flows from private equity to venture capital, with creative talent and cultural production as just another speculative means in the supply chain that enriches the 0.01%. In conclusion, my project argues that the weakness of the media sector is in large part due to the financialization of the cultural industries, leading to a reduction in the scope, heterogeneity, and diversity of the cultural industries. If finance is a destructive force in the media, then it follows that financial reform would be media reform. Therefore, regulating the financial sector would go a long way towards revitalizing the media sector. The complexity of government regulation of the financial sector may seem beyond the scope of the responsibilities of the media scholar, but finance's dramatic, destructive influence has made financial literacy absolutely necessary. I was describing my work to a colleague the other day, and they responded that they didn't think they would understand any of that financial stuff. Why is it that we are willing to wade through Lacan or Derrida, but not financial documents? As Gayatri Spivak proclaims, the state is trapped in the demands of finance capital. Resistance must know about financial regulation in order to demand it. This is bloodless resistance, and it has to be learned. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jing Wang, a doctoral candidate from the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University. Louder? Oh, okay. Yeah, so I am, maybe stand here. I am Jing Wang, a doctoral candidate from the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University. I changed my title a little bit to make my theoretical point of departure more bold. And but in my presentation, I will still bring up the user's perspective. Yeah, so this project try to put two groups of research into conversation. One is the studies on platform economy, and the other is the political economic approach to convergence theory. And also this project shows the large background of my dissertation project, which is on digital finance in China, or so-called Chinese fintechs. Yeah, so from platform to re-platformization, digital finance and cooperative convergence within and beyond Alibaba. So let me ask you, how many of you have heard of Alibaba? Okay, great. So then I have a lot to skip then. Yeah, so Alibaba is the largest e-commerce company in China, and now is the most profitable internet corporation in China. But today I really want to bring a company that derived from Alibaba to the front, which is Ant Financial. So Ant Financial was a subsidiary company of Alibaba and functioned as a payment and transaction organ for Taobao and Tmall, which are the two e-commerce sites established by Alibaba. And but now Ant Financial is an independent company, topped the digital financial industries, or so-called fintech industries. So how has this company been in touch with its users? Let me go through these scenarios. So in China, especially the mainland China, you can say Alipay almost anywhere, almost in all kinds of purchase occasions, even at the street market. And also the one on the right up is a picture sent by my friend from University of Toronto. So she told me that she could purchase a book in the University of Toronto bookstore using Alipay. And when she traveled to Japan, she could also use Alipay in a Japanese restaurant. Yeah, so since 2013, Alibaba started to reach the global market, especially on its digital payment sector. In year 2010, the central bank granted the third-party payment licenses, also called TPP licenses, to 27 IT companies or internet companies, including Alibaba and Tencent. Prior to TPP, credit card transactions and clearance have been mostly processed by banks and the state-controlled UnionPay. So by January 2017, among the 730 million internet users in China, more than 70% of them have used TPP to shop online, and more than 50% of them have used TPP to purchase in real store. So this is about the about Alipay, the payment tool. And then while you're shopping online, you could borrow money. You could actually borrow money with zero down pay and sometimes even zero interest using this and check later. And also, there are some in your life. There are always some moments. There could be some moments that you feel frustrated about having no money, and Alibaba will tell you, no worries. You can borrow money anytime, anywhere by using and cash now. And also, Alibaba provided this Sesame credit system. If you use Alipay very often, shopping online, offline, and also you could pay back the and check now on time, you will have a very good Sesame credits based on which you could actually get cash from Ant Financial. And yeah, so now you got some money from you got some dormant cash in your e-purse, and also you got some borrowed money from Ant Cash Now, and you are ready for investment. In June 2013, Alibaba launched this online investment application called Yuebao that allows people to transfer their dormant cash from their online payment account, which is called Zhifubao or Alipay, to an investment account. So the app is extremely user-friendly, and the users can invest from 1 Chinese yuan, which is about 15 cents. Ant Financial doesn't charge any transaction fee, and the investors usually get higher return compared to their investment with banks. So in less than a year, Yuebao has attracted more than $65 billion from Chinese people who enjoyed being lay investors without technical or financial constraints. The expansion of Ant Financial is driven by the convergence of the shopping, payment, and then later on investment platforms within and beyond Alibaba. The reason I said it's beyond is because since 2014, Alipay or Ant Financial were actually financially and operationally independent to Alibaba. Thus, this kind of convergence is also a convergence of multiple companies and multiple business categories. So talking about convergence, the idea of convergence has distinctive implications in various disciplinary or historical contexts. The political economic perspective, which I want to take, of convergence theory sparked in the late 1950s and early 1960s, when the Soviet and the Western market system were immutably converging. Capitalist societies that were becoming more centrally planned, while the state socialist ones grew more capitalist. The debate between the supporters of the state-supervised economy and the democratic free enterprises was deeply tinged with the political and ideological tensions between communism and capitalism. But in the post-Cold War era, such a debate had been much depoliticized. The mainstream economists reached an agreement that the gulf perceived by Marxists and democratic free enterprises between communism and capitalism was more of a matter of efficiency, meaning the practical effectiveness of markets and plans. So to this point, convergence theory had legitimized the coexistence of market and planned economy. The cooperation between the state and enterprises had become a pragmatic choice as long as it could help enhancing efficiency. Meanwhile, the efficiency-oriented consideration also emphasizes the advancing role of technologies, which usually requires a very large-scale investment collectively managed by the government and large corporations. The technology-oriented convergence of the market and the planned economy is clearly seen in the platform business model. which in the digital, which brings us to the third stage, the big data era. So on one hand, platform business represents highly liberalized economy. The essence of this economy is the intermediaries or platforms that bring two sides of the market, and oftentimes even multiple sides of the market, together online to exchange values. On the other hand, platform business embodies an extremely planned economy in which algorithms and big data have been determinants for the creation and promotion of products and services. So platform companies are the ultimate planners who maintain the rights to design and the use of such digital technologies. So this is kind of the theoretical background. And then I want to take, so in this project, I want to take Ant Financial as a digital financial platform reflecting the political economic changes in Chinese platform economy, and ask how has Alibaba developed from an e-commerce website to a digital financial platform. And in discussing its social and political consequences, I want to ask what roles does the Ant Financial play in mitigating the financial risk that has been persistent to Chinese investors, and also how has Ant Financial posed regulatory changes to Chinese government. I collected histories of Ant Financial and also conducted policy analysis in addition to my interviews with Ant Financial users regarding their experiences and the perceptions of Ant Financial's products and services. Yeah, so here are the kind of the Ant Financial empire, the scaling empire, which reflect the process of re-platformization. So I have talked about the from the online shopping to so you use Alipay for online shopping, which accumulates some dormant cash in your e-purse, and also Alipay allows you to transfer the bank savings to this e-purse. Based on these two parts of dormant cash, you can invest with Yuebao, and these individual investors ultimately are connected to the Tianhong Asset Management, which is the largest money market fund in the world. So to this point, Ant Financial had been developed into a full licensed financial company, which have also developed multiple sub-platforms, including the payment platforms, credit platforms, and also internet banks, which is the MyBank, in addition to its rural platforms and also the global payment platforms, all under the umbrella of Ant Financial. Yeah, so the business growth of Ant Financial relies on the re-platformization processes, or the convergence of 5 platforms rooted in China. So Yuebao also had a global reach in addition to this domestic expansion. By November 2017, Yuebao has developed more than 450 million users in 21 countries. Every individual platform and the convergence of the multiple platforms are organized and supported by the digital financial technologies, specifically the big data and data algorithms. So has this kind of very innovative digital finance been meaningful? So I mean, this kind of digital finance is quite meaningful for the innovation of Chinese digital economy. It is also quite an innovation for the finance sector and also the marketization of Chinese financial industries. But is it also meaningful and innovative in terms of mitigating the financial risks that has been a persistent concern for the Chinese individual investors? So unlike the financial market in the West, Chinese market is really featured with a large aggregation of individual players. And the answer is no. the three parties that have been involved in this risk risk issue, they are even not on the same pages. There are three types of discourses surrounding the idea of risks, which have been advocated or promoted by three groups of actors. In the regulatory regime, financial risk has been defined and evaluated according to the economics or corporate financial terms, such as cash pooling, meaning the holding and the transferring of money between companies within the group leverage ratio, or money laundering, the concealment of illegal money, etc. And the ultimate purpose of this regulatory agency is to prevent systematic risks, or in other words, to minimize the impacts of potential default or failure of an entity on the whole system. So it's pretty much on the very micro level. But to the second group of actor, which is the digital financial companies or fintech companies, their primary selling point is, we will keep your money safe. The user's account details are double A encrypted and will go through two-step verification before any transactions. So their emphasis on the control of risk is more about the digital, account securities that has been warranted by digital technologies. So it's a quite diverged discourse. And in addition, these companies offer higher returns compared to saving interests or the wealth management products provided by traditional banks. So the other selling point is, so in real practices, so this kind of higher return is really attractive to the individual investors. And the other selling point is flexibility, specifically the speed of processing and also investment, transfer in and transfer out money is quite convenient for the individual investors themselves. And the third group of actors involved in this risk discourses are the digital financial investors. So a lot of them know that higher returns means higher risks, but in practices, most of them are taking an opportunistic approach, and especially relying on the flexibility features provided by these digital financial technologies. So they consider that if I can transfer in and out or transfer out my money very conveniently and swiftly, I basically got the affordance to avoid all various kinds of financial risks. Yeah. So digital technologies in many cases play a very important role for these financial investors as a risk-proven techniques. And yeah. So so when it comes to the regulatory challenges that digital finance has posed to Chinese regulatory agencies, so for now, by now, there is no grand regulatory frameworks for digital financial companies. And while digital finance is deepening financial industries, so digital finance actually has crossed over the business divisions that the central bank has identified. For example, Anti-Financial is running payment services, but also running investment services. And also, it is actually launching the insurance services in the last, since this year. So for this kind of crossover business divisions, central banks right now, they don't have a grand regulation that could be applied. Having no regulations for the platform businesses, the central bank's the central bank is dealing with Anti-Financial and many other digital finance companies through a distributive strategy, meaning that each business sector has to apply for a license specifically for this sector. So the early development of digital financial platform therefore took a great advantage of the policy vacuum. Yeah, in conclusion, I want to say that these anti-financial cases actually show the process of re-platformization in which multiple platform businesses have been consolidated, and also data resources generated from existing platforms have been reused to expand to develop new platforms, and also to enlarge the multi-platform businesses. And the re-platformization is part of the platform economy based on the digital-driven planning of productive materials and human capitals, but proliferate in a marketized environment, which is really lack of government regulations. Also, re-platformization is centralizing processes, meaning that the big data algorithms, investment capitals, IT professionals, mean the human resources, and also the political economic power becoming increasingly centralized at the oligopoly internet corporations in China. And in Chinese context, this kind of planned marketization is collectively fulfilled by the state and large internet corporations, especially the big four, the BATG, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Jingdong. Yeah, so going back to the convergence theory, I think convergence is not only a business paradigm that has been widely taken by Chinese internet corporations, but it is also a governing scheme that collectively committed by the Chinese government and the cooperative actors. Yeah, so I will stop here, and I look forward to your comments and the feedbacks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. Thanks to the organizers for organizing this. I'm pretty nervous because I'm just going to tell stories. I don't have much theory to share, but hopefully it's through the stories that you might find something interesting to talk about later on. So this is sort of like this is awkward because I'm like, okay. So this is the second iteration of ideas I'm working with right now with regards to the production of maps and models and the role they play in a bureaucratic logistical process. But first I'd like to open this presentation with a quote from Nat Rossiter's book published in 2016 entitled Software, Infrastructure and Labor. So he says here, the logistical city marks the departure from both the global city of finance capital and the industrial city of factories. The logistical city is elastic. Its borders are flexible and determined by the ever-changing coordinates of supply chain capitalism. Populated by warehouses, ports, intermodal terminus, container yards, and data centers, the logistical city is spatially defined by zones, corridors, and concessions. It's a city that subtracts the time of dreams to maintain the demands of 24/7 capitalism. So for many, this model has become the world anchor. Rossiter's portrayal of the logistical city hints at a similar circuit of commodities, goods, and people moving across borders with ease, where contingencies only serve to support the accumulation of capital for logistical operations to be on and in the flow. The logistical city speaks of life and labor, textured by the expansion of the sovereign, eager to extract value from labor, life, and nature, to carve out new forms of territory through data. Logistical media, as technologies, infrastructure, and software, capture, coordinate, and control the movement, as we talked about yesterday, of people, finance, and things. As John Durham Peters suggests in the study of logistical media, The job of logistical media is to organize and orient, to arrange people and property, often into grids. Now, what if these grids begin in forests? My talk proves at the texture and temporality of logistical flow, focusing on the labor that organizes and arranges the measurement, calculation, location, and movement of forest carbon in Indonesia. I offer an ethnographic account of those who produce and maintain this logistical media and infrastructure, attending to the artifacts, the messiness, and the contested terrains of logistical systems crucial for bureaucratic control and oversight of forest life. And now I have the flashy pictures. My fieldwork in the past 2 summers looked at how geodesists, so people who measure like the shape of Earth and come up with map projections, environmentalists and technicians in Indonesia scramble to map what's left of their forests. They act upon carbon futures with the help of models and maps, extracting, aggregating, and synchronizing data streams from statistical reports, satellite and drone imagery, and technical documents. Such practices around data are integral to the RED+ program, which is a global climate initiative that treats forest carbon as a matrix for financing a country's performance in forest conservation. So under RED+, the value of forest carbon is not necessarily tied and not necessarily captured by individual landowners. So it's not that individual landowners will be compensated, but tied instead to the regional or national level, and this is the case for Indonesia, with the state having to demonstrate its competencies for the country's preparedness for a carbon market. So crucial to performing this readiness is the creation of an accurate land cover base map under Indonesia's One Map policy. You know, it's funny because when I show this map, nobody knows where Indonesia is because it seems to be everywhere but nowhere. But anyway, so never is this pursuit for accuracy more evident than in the enrollment of environmentalists and subcontracted mapping technicians in One Map policy. So I did my fieldwork mostly in the 2 red dots below and the blue circle above. Borneo, West Kalimantan is the region that I did some of the work at, and Jakarta is the capital city of Indonesia, and 2 hours away from that is Bandung. So, you can't hear it? Yeah. Is it? Am I too close? Is it here? I'm good oscillation? Good resonance? Okay. But so everything before was not good?
We heard it was just hard. Here, I'll turn up more so you can stay back.
Yeah, tune me up, yeah. So am I good here? Okay. So in 2011, following attempts to bring Borneo within the national forest, so what you see in the blue circle up there, Indonesia's Ministry of Forestry and Ministry of Environment compared maps of primary forests to calculate areas eligible for RED+. Now the maps, when they were laid on top of the other, showed primary forest boundaries that did not match, stirring uncertainty on the future of climate finance in Indonesia. Environmentalists viewed this mismatch as an opportunity to make more accurate images with drones. And mapping and surveying technicians began to retrain themselves to better identify what's forest from non-forest. Both groups contribute heavily, yet invisibly, to President Joko Widodo, the current president, decree for the acceleration of One Map policy in 2016, which includes, among other things, an integrated super data bank for spatial data across Indonesia's 18,309 islands. So it's led by geodesists in Geospatial Information Agency, or Badan Informasi Geospasial in Indonesia, or BIG for short, which is what I'll refer to now on. 85 thematic maps will be remade to detail environmental risks and inform decision making. During my preliminary research, I found geodesists, environmentalists, and technicians grappling with the question of what makes accuracy and what kind of work accurate representations do. Geodesists in BIG told me how accurate spatial data enables a closer 1:1 correspondence between map and ground truth. With 4 million hectares of forest in Borneo to remap in a year, BIG subcontracted technicians from external companies. BIG also solicited environmentalists to contribute forest maps that detail illegal encroachment to land. These maps, however, were constantly rejected and not viewed as accurate, a geologist complained to me that technicians and environmentalists produce maps that did not, quote, match real ground. Technicians and environmentalists rebutted that they could not keep reality within their representations. Drawing and surveying boundaries involve dealing with rural property relations subject to multiple claims. In effect, an accurate map today underpins a plausible future carbon trade on the ground, providing information to carbon investors to calculate risk and reward from such transactions. So in this talk, I will show how logistical media, such as maps, format and create a context in which the future of forest life is realized through a state of anticipation. Anticipation, following Michelle Murphy's study of logistical infrastructure aimed at governing population, can be taught as the sort of these abstract hikes of maps and models, and at the same time, a lived, embodied state of expectation, aspiration, and anxiety. Anticipation is a, quote, temporal orientation towards the future and an affective state, and a cited forward-looking subjective condition of yearning, desire, aspiration, anxiety, or dread. It is in this desire of struggle of achieving accuracy that anticipation is reproduced in recursion, demanding the citizens to map now, even if the technical pursuit of accuracy bears little impact for Indonesia's present environment. So in what follows, I'll sort of do this sort of storytelling thing, which is something I'm trying out, showing how visions of environmental futures are anticipated and remade, whether it be in geospatial, external companies, or the view from drones. And I show how they finally settle on these moments of deliberation and pause as a means to leave out the failed promises of one map policy. Accuracy is a terrain in which technicians learn to question given relationships between what they see in satellite images such as this and the plausibility of these visualizations giving way to a better low-carbon economy in Indonesia. A mapping technician subcontracted by BIG, Randy, shared with me what he wishes to address with mapping. He says, quote, Indonesians are sick of being exploited by oil palm companies. In the early 2000s, Indonesia became the largest oil palm exporter in the world. Oil palm is found in more than half of United States consumer products. When peatland forests in Borneo are converted to oil palm plantations, their huge stores of water are drained. And this converted land becomes quickly flammable during dry seasons, resulting in drawn-out forest fires that impinge on the health of Indonesians. In the last 5 years, Randy showed me how one might identify plantations from forest and satellite images at Bandung in Sarana Prima Data, a geospatial analytics company located 2 hours away from capital city. So the reason why you see, just to explain this image a bit because I really like it, so this is a satellite image, and the reason why there's like different colors is because they're taken at different temporal times. So one could be taken in the morning and another one could be taken at night. That's why you see different shades. And you can see the plantation design, which is sort of like the square grids that come across, if you can see them. And the reason why the tracks of roads are sort of like circulating is because the oil palm plantations do not only just grow on flat ground, but also around mountains. So you'll see this sort of like swirling. And this is my favorite image. Consider how technicians deliberate what pixels make a forest. Despite what technicians can and cannot see, they had to redraw shapes around landforms according to BIG's mapping standards. Shapes like rectangles and squares were preferred over irregular curves. Now consider this image on the screen. I don't know what you actually see here, but a pixelated montage of beiges, greens, and browns are visible. So Randy teaches me that when you want to identify a forest, what you do is basically when the brown changes into green, what you see is the age of a forest and the beginnings of a house. You try your best to draw a square, but always a little bit of forest or house will escape. End quote. So often enough, technicians spend hours, and I was with them while doing this because I was also mapping, I was learning how they were seeing things. Spending hours deliberating on whether they should add more forest or house, right? Should I add more green pixels or brown pixels? because they start to realize in those hours of deliberation, that adding more pixels or excluding more pixels had implications for who owns what. So BIG thought that geometry could do better for ArcGIS. So basically this mapping platform ArcGIS, when you draw a square like that, you can basically enclose the amount of area that's within the square or circle or irregular curve, and you can count the total area of land. That's crucial for deciding how much forest can be conserved for a carbon market. So if the making of carbon market requires such forms and shapes of accuracy, its final product also effaces the sort of political and affective components that went into producing a statistical finding like total area of primary forests. The difference between a map and what's out there, or ground truth, was made most clear to me when I was on this field surveys with technicians in August 2017. So after we map this, we draw these shapes on these pixels, we try to search for points. So I followed Randy in search for a GPS point plotted on the image of Borneo of West Kalimantan pictured in 2015, only to find that his GPS navigator refused to work. So recall that we were here in August 2017. Halfway through our search lost, residents warned us that we were trespassing the concession areas of a German timber logging company, as you see here. Randy will be killed once spotted. Randy refused to stop and explain, quote, "I have to find this point. BIG wants to know if this is a forest or field. I won't want our team to be delayed," end quote. The acceleration of one map policies requires that subcontracted technicians like Randy himself have to find this point because they have to meet a tight deadline, right? So if you don't manage to find a point, you don't get to confirm the accuracy of your maps. What can we make of images dated 2 years ago and the land for which we encountered in 2017, already demolished and designed for monoculture? How are we to know where we are if when we are was imaged 2 years ago? If technicians map forests in the present, in order for forestry scientists to construct models of forest future states, technicians are held responsible for staggering different temporalities at once. If synchronizing different temporal frames risks technicians' lives, real-time data was a drone technologist's fantasy. This technologist belonged to Advocacy and Research Institute School of Drones. First established in 2015, School of Drones is a loose coalition of engineers, activists, and geographers dedicated to the research, policy, and use of unmanned vehicles like drones and many other kinds of other unmanned vehicles for addressing environmental issues. They train residents at the rural peripheries of Kalimantan to fly drones fitting for their claims to land, such as in providing visual evidence of illegal resource incursion. Since their inception in 2015, the Indonesian government has requested School of Drones to quote, "drone here, drone there," with images of forested land being churned out at incredible speed and efficiency. But this was soon to reach a standstill 2 years later. In 2017, I found that a friend and School of Drones member, Ali, had passed away. While trying to map out the last few hectares of community forest land for potential inclusion to one map policy, Ali felt an intense pain in his back, followed by vomiting, convulsions, and a feverish chill. His search for such points and pixels had finally taken a toll on his body. The doctor declared his death 2 hours after, without diagnosis. This was June 7, 2017. At Ali's funeral, other forestry scholars, activists, and friends questioned the promises of One Map policy. Pressed to address what else One Map can offer, they reflected on what kind of maps they could make better and more. Ali's wife, Siti, firm, answered in response, quote, "He was tired. He had to make all these maps and make them well for them to be accepted. Yet he has never finished them, and they have never been accepted by BIG," end quote. In Ali's state of exhaustion, one might be compelled to argue that logistical media sets up these impossible standards that push body limits to the point of death. A few weeks after, I found myself seated with Ali's friend, Raja, a School of Drones member and co-founder at the Law Enforcement Department of Ministry of Forestry and Environment's newly built control room. The control room housed seats that cave into 4 large LCD screens. each showing a near-time satellite image of forest fire hotspots. This fire spread quickly and require redress, right? So wildfire fighting with immediate effect. So the urgent task for the law enforcement agency is to sort of hold accountable the perpetrators of forest fires, often thought to be smallholders employed by oil palm plantation companies. Raja agreed to catch his culprits with drone imagery, with a condition that he's going to add these images to a larger database that the collective is using to train machine learning models to automate the recognition of forests at risk of deforestation. Raja's interest in machine learning was not aimed at achieving a more efficient recognition of forest life and death. He was instead deferring the risk to algorithms and models taught to now carry out the tasks that Ali and other mappers had bad consequences performing. The government puts its citizens in risk and precarity, whether it be trekking through no man's land like Randy did, or a persistent encounter with atmospheric toxicity as Ali did. Raja was, in some sense, engaged in a moment of respite, a delay of having always to speak up, participate, and to quote drone here, drone there. The key image one might get from reading about One Map policy seems to be this centralized, seemingly all-knowing platform with the authority to aggregate, analyze, and visualize spatial data across the archipelago. This is the image also invoked by Satyajit, the head of the Jakarta Smart City Management Unit, who regards making better use of data as his personal mission. He says here about One Map, quote, pass on the Quran, even if only one verse. So on data, also pass it on, even if only one piece of data. Satyajit's quote sort of provokes anticipation for a future that's inevitable, right? One that's mediated from holy book to data. And it sort of has this sort of linear trajectory of progress and pre-made future. But upon the second reading, I thought that the Quranic-like data here also involves a minimal action of, quote, passing on. As with Raja's delegation of mapping to algorithms, and Randy's banal insistence of finding the point, even if it hinges upon potential death. What is the political valence of the passing on, deference, deliberation, and pointless search that register at first sight just banal pauses? I argue that it's such pauses that sort of register for me as a forms of resistance. In these two vignettes, I trace how anticipation permeates how technicians and drone technologies represent forests in ways that are intelligible to the Indonesian state. In the process of examining how my interlocutors know and act on the future, we see how different map-making processes may transform or constrain bureaucratic vision from the inside, either by deliberating on what makes a forest or just sort of delivering emergency services to hotspots that the state fails to fulfill. Yet anticipation also sets this array of affective states into action that's not only just anxious and hopeful, but also kind of a pause and deliberation that intervenes in this anxious forward-looking subject, always in pursuit of the impossible accuracy and bearing the risk of doing so. It serves in some sense, as in pause, a kind of refusal to conform with expectations about a speculative future and opens up instead a way to care for the body and others in present time. At least for me, one is not passive in pause, but active in deliberation, for it serves the purpose of asking what makes a point, what makes a line, what makes a forest, what makes a house, what makes life. These banal acts of deliberation are performed pixel by pixel, point by point, line by line, flight by flight, unsettling the flow of the logistical infrastructure, of the promise of connection and oneness. So maybe the question is a deliberation and anticipatory act, and if it is one, then what forms of future is it oriented towards? In this way, how might the work and labor that go into ensuring flow account for such deference, aimlessness, and delay to engage in the kind of mindfulness of the present? Future projections of greenhouse gas emissions present itself with challenges that are conceptualized as a crisis contained within an unrealized future event. But what if we to understand the ruins of deforestation as what we have been living with and within? Here's where I return back to Rosetta's quote on the temporal focus of a logistical city. He says here that if a logistical city truly subtracts a dream or time of dreams to maintain the demands of 24/7 capitalism, how might pauses, as refuses, help us dream again. All right, thanks.
Cool. So I always used to like to use a font that refers to a migrant population or refugee population I'm writing about. And every time I come to the US, Damascus and Baghdad, which have Mac font types, don't transfer for some reason. It's kind of funny. Okay. So and what else did I want to say before? Oh yeah, I guess what I want to start with is have any of you seen a film from the United Arab Emirates? Okay, great. So, whether you know it or not, and most likely you just proved it, the latter, hundreds of movies, Chinese, Bollywood, and Hollywood, have been partially shot in the United Arab Emirates this century. Here are some of the most recognizable examples. So we've got Star Trek in there, Sylvia. With centuries of expertise in what's now evolved into supply chain management, the Emirates, and particularly Dubai, this paper's port of call, aim to capture a sizable portion of the film industry's offshore activity. With no appreciable history of filmmaking all its own, which is probably the reason for the no show of hands, Dubai has built what it takes to attract international split location production, an intricate and highly planned matrix of legislative, logistical, service-oriented and labour capacities, including as will be my focus for today, a particular architecture that conforms to the circuitry and principles of global supply chains. What I'll be unravelling is both specific and grounded, as an example, and a purposefully designed template ready for violent copy-pasting elsewhere. The cocoon-like, black hole, blank canvases we know as film and TV studios, their very raison d'etre to be transformed into a believable anywhere else, serve as revealing examples of the purposeful effacement of the real cost of competitiveness in motion. One such enterprise is Dubai Studio City, a recent $500 million entrant into the lattice of globalized film, television, and digital content creation, replete with some of the world's largest sound stages, a backlot, water tanks, production offices, and operational support structures, including the on-site Dubai Film and TV Commission. Although owned by the state, Studio City usually slants itself towards manufacturing, not less towards manufacturing media for its own country, and is instead adapted to operate as a usually rentable cog within a globally dispersed supply chain for an equally transnational media economy. Consequently, though this paper won't ignore the implications for workers, my attention more squarely falls today on the studio's complicity with the rise of a particular type of global real estate economy, propelling and propelled by the liquidity of capital and the slinking invisibility of logistical maneuver, both still bashing through real space with real after effects. Given their roots in often centralized and Fordist industries, it comes as no surprise that film and TV studios have frequently been conceptualized as factories. But what if we instead forge analogies, and it's not a total, kind of correct fit, but I think it helps us think a little, with some other similarly looking bland windowless buildings to some of the current epoch's most influential architectural forms, the warehouse and the distribution centre, even the big box store. These are structures dedicated to the economies of circulation, and adjusting our analytical perspectives towards them pulls focus on the influence and recruitment of supply chain management into contemporary media production. It's not hard to conceive of Dubai, the world's 7th largest transshipment port, as one vast distribution centre. The Emirate adheres to what Thomas Sigler identifies as a relational city, a metropolis that accrues prodigious income from movement rather than the start-to-finish manufacture of goods. Its real estate acclimated to providing transitory homes with minor inputs added during a much longer journey. However nimble supply chains are, they still require points where additions can be made, new trajectories charted, and flows managed. And Guillermo really excellently pointed that out this morning, so salute to him. To cross-reference Jesse Le Cavalier's observation about Walmart stores, the infrastructural ambitions of such architectures stand, quote, more as valves regulating flow than as reservoirs for capturing it. They're containers, but they're also conduits. These valves are standardized for ease of movement, from studio design and technical conformity to the acquiescence of legislation and taxation to the needs of transnational media corporations. A globalized notion of freedom of expression pushes these operations into free zone spaces of exemption that sit at odds with the allowances of ordinary inhabitants of the city-state proper. The subsequent interchangeability of these sites also renders them extremely vulnerable to replacement. Accordingly, a raft of wide-ranging policies and lawmaking boosts Dubai's logistical advantage. In 2016, and I find this really quite extraordinary, the Emirate apportioned a staggering 35% of budget spent on infrastructural expansion, from roads and ports to telecommunications. And just to make a comparison, the US and Saudi Arabia spent 3% of their budget that year on infrastructure, so 35 to 3. Global dominance within air and sea transportation speeds workers, materials, and equipment along the media production line. The Dubai Film and TV Commission toils restlessly and at real human cost to putting in place regulations that rationalize production process. Multiple location shooting permits are promised within 72 hours and crew permits within 24. Commission workers advise on suitable locations across the Emirate and negotiate deals on hotels, personnel transportation and shipping, squeezing countless others along the way, all adding to the coffers of the government-owned enterprises such as Emirates Airlines, the Jebel Ali container port, and the Jumeirah luxury hotel complex, just to, as a few of many. The Commission can also draw together, upon request, local and international crew from a database of over 200 production companies. Well, for me, the treatment of the workforce is our most urgent concern here. I'm not going to dwell on it comprehensively today, in part because it's a set of arguments I've already laid down in other published work, and not to, I'm presuming no one's read it, but if you want to read it, you can help yourself, and I'll happily share that with you. So to gloss, with a conservatively estimated 89% of Dubai's workforce believed to be non-nationals, labour migration in the UAE subsumes migration in its totality. Dependent on company sponsorship for only the duration of a project, all employees are visitors, matching logistics' frictionless ideals about legally enforcing the disposability and flexibility of labour. In the industries under consideration, they're typically cited in an archipelago of media-oriented free zones, of which Studio City is just one, that exploit exceptional legislation commanding everything from augmented foreign ownership to a total ban on unionisation. Workers are therefore easily replaceable if they become troublesome, and by an ever-ready supply of dispossessed migrants waiting in the wings, whether from war-torn neighbouring states or countries in Africa and Asia that are rapidly privatising all means of survival. With the capturing and pillaging of resources that were once closer to the commons at the forefront, I now want to turn to how these logistical architectures collude with the machinations of contemporary global real estate industries. And just before I move on, actually, it's kind of interesting to compare this free zone architecture to the ones we saw from Guillermo and Dara yesterday. Very little, you can just walk into these, which is interesting in terms of creative economies. Okay, so Dubai Studio City boss Jamal al-Sharif openly lays out how the real estate interests drove the free zone's inception. The whole focus was to build the real estate, build the structure, prepare it as fast as possible, because eventually down the road, you'll have to build the people, build the industry, which is going to drive the real estate, and so it goes on. Welcome to Dubai. The bank accounts of construction and contracting firms flourish thanks to a poorly paid, subjugated, frequently indentured, I would argue, migrant workforce. Sorry, I'm pressing the wrong. And a top-down governance structure that can formulate, coordinate, and finance in a planned fashion. Unpredictable fluctuations in rental income are dampened because they're braided into an associated and largely sovereign ownership of a number of concerns to which the following slides can only begin to do justice. And also don't do justice because I'm really shit at this kind of laying things out. So legally, the ruling family who controls this and much more is the default owner of undeveloped land in the emirate. And so speculative, kind of build it and they will come, ventures bear much lower risks than elsewhere. If there's one thing almost everyone knows about Dubai, it's that it's unprecedented growth as a built environment, with oil and gas wealth pumped into massive housing, shopping, office, and other commercial developments. Urbanization functioning as an engine for diversified capital accumulation, transforming oil into property in order to accelerate further growth. The Emirate logically seeks to populate these buildings on a largely rental and leasing for profit basis through a range of client scales. First up, the large media corporations. Regional headquartering economists have charted of late how we have sort of this kind of increased shift and en masse towards what are known as the emerging economies. These are the companies that have found homes in the free zones of the Dubai Creative Clusters Authority for logistical reasons, married to the types of security of which we should be wary. Obliged to follow suit, smaller companies, from equipment renters to digital effects companies, feel obliged to likewise set up shop here. This tendency has been intensified by the decimation of once nationalised media industries in the region and actually beyond, many of whose personnel have since moved to Dubai to try their luck in the privatised media. Wealth spawns from economic instability and primitive accumulation elsewhere. Media nationalisation, ever the target of organs like the IMF, World Bank, and USAID. Dubai's much higher rents and service fees, and more so the availability of profit for purchase in free zones, don't just feed back into a profitable diversification of oil money. The aim, ultimately, has not been simply to lock investment in the sector into global supply chain profits, but also to instigate real estate liberalisation itself. The global rise of derivatives markets, of mortgages, debt and securitisation allows spatially fixed real estate to be invested and traded almost as simply as more fugacious carriers of capital like stocks and shares, thanks to advances in information technology and the deregulation and harmonisation of markets. And I'm very thankful to you, Audrey, for explaining hedge funds so beautifully, which I'm now like piggybacking. Okay. So just a shot from the bus I caught after my free zone trip. Just as studio complexes promise an ever-ready mutability, bricks and mortar here liquefy and can be enfolded into diversified investment portfolios from anywhere on the planet, largely undertaken and managed in dangerously speculative fashions by insurance and pension companies, mutual funds, trusts, and private equity funds. Many of us have our financial futures invested in Dubai without even knowing it. And then hopefully it's then reinvested in some more shitty films, as I learned earlier. Thank you. Simultaneously, the foreign direct investment attracted acts as a pivot for these large state-generated initiatives to distance themselves from regionally specific moral impediments that inhibit the UAE's financial sector. Michelle Buckley and Adam Hinaya stress how Islamic banking, with its adherence to Sharia law, a mainstay of the citizenry of the region, forbids both the accrual of profit from interest and excessive risk, which is considered akin to gambling. As both are the lifeblood of the neoliberal economy, the very same one Dubai aims to link into and profit from, loopholes must be sought. actually, the only reason this photo is here is because I actually took it myself, even though it looks computer generated. And you repeatedly try and take this photo to make it look real. That's as real as it gets. Okay, so one strategy has been to entice FDI, whose provenance need not hang on Islamic code, into the built environment. The globalization of the real estate sector, with its readily available external loans for foreign investors, can then participate prominently in this fix, orbiting as it does at a distance from religious protocols. Those benefited from the escalating property prices and ballooning rents, confacted by over-leveraging, mainly, again, sovereign concerns, but not entirely, like Dubai Holding, Amar, and DP World, have since reached out into all corners of the global real estate's dominion. This is, again, only 2 examples of scores. From Azerbaijan to Germany, these companies have amassed property portfolios embracing everything from housing and shopping complexes to ports and logistic hubs in every continent, save Antarctica. One net effect to take seriously is the influence these built environments have on the lives of those working and living in them. Just as the transnational corporations headquartered in Dubai compel a tranche of legislative and economic insistences, so too the Emirati presence overseas can coerce local governments into conforming to its whims. And the politics of this one, if you can see the headline, is really compelling and also, sorry, not compelling, just appalling, really. And note the sort of use of infrastructure in the way it's described too. So the political and financial structures that care better for owners and landlords than those who rent is accordingly consolidated, yet also through the expectations extrapolated by their architectures in infrastructural logics. By grappling with how something like a media complex instrumentalizes the current vicissitudes of both the global supply chain and the international property market, is to get closer to the impact of capital's harmfully mercurial character. Agile, like the logistics that render Studio City a viable offshore production prospect, property becomes a lever in capital's opportunistic hairpin turns as it steers investment towards profit. This is a continuation of Marx's MCM general formula that facilitates the primacy of exchange value schemas. The abstract quality of capital persists as it travels and metamorphosizes, while what is obscured is the exploitation of workers inputting value, to studios and films included. And when we think about construction labour, I just want to, bear in the slide that I showed about conditions of construction workers would also apply to the people building film sets and so on. Here, under direct threat of easily losing their livelihoods, even their right to remain in the country. The point has not been to demonise Dubai above and beyond anywhere else. That is just as much a confluence of global neoliberal currents, even though a good deal of the site-specific actions I've presented clearly warrant critique. Dubai's success evidences precise motivations, strategies, and agendas that might just as easily work against it. The modular character of contemporary offshore production leaves its workers enormously vulnerable as the industry ceaselessly exchanges and substitutes real locations and employees along its journey into and out of markets. Although we may only see Dubai on screen occasionally, the capital this helps generate slicks outwards in financialized and concrete forms that invigorate a particular macro and transnational economic ideology. As the film-focused examples investigated in this paper have only begun to illustrate, such armatures jeopardize the stability of countless people and, by implication, all of us. Thank you.